Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at, well, a really tense geopolitical situation unfolding between India and Pakistan. The actual shooting might have stopped, but the conflict, it's definitely not over.
No, not at all. It's just shifted. That ceasefire on May 10th, 2025, after India's Operation Sindoor, it wasn't really an endpoint. Think of it more like the battle moving off the ground and into the realm of stories, of narratives.
Exactly. Because the moment the ceasefire hit, Pakistan was out there declaring victory. And India, well, they weren't having any of that. They responded, and fast, on the global stage.
Right. It's a fascinating, almost textbook case of how perception management is just as critical as military might in, today's world. So our mission here is to really unpack this whole saga, look at these competing narratives, and crucially, explain why this fight over the story matters to you, our listener. It connects to India's global standing, its security, even domestic politics.
Okay, let's get into it. So May 10th, the ceasefire kicks in after Operation Sindoor, Pakistan's immediate move.
Well, they acted very quickly. It wasn't just press statements claiming victory. They made a very symbolic, very visible gesture.
What cause?
Promoting their army chief, General Asim Munir, to Field Marshal.
Field Marshal. Wow, that's a title with a lot of weight, historically speaking.
Huge weight. And the parallel seems pretty clear, It feels very much like they were trying to echo India honoring Field Marshal Manekshaw after the 1971 war, almost like trying to cement their version of events immediately.
So Pakistan's focusing on this big symbolic win at home. Meanwhile, India decides to take the narrative battle international.
Precisely. India launched what you could only call a diplomatic blitz, a major counteroffensive, but fought with envoys, not weapons. They weren't going to let Pakistan's story go unanswered.
And this is the diplomatic roadshow, these 7 all-party delegations heading out to 33 countries. That sounds like a massive effort.
Oh, it absolutely was. A huge investment of political capital and resources. And it wasn't random. There were 3 main strategic goals behind this whirlwind tour.
Okay, let's break those down. What was goal number 1? Something about the UN Security Council.
Right. So Pakistan has a non-permanent seat on the UNSC until the end of 2026. And critically, they're set to chair the council in July 2025. That gives them a significant platform.
A loudspeaker, basically.
Pretty much. So India's delegations were making the rounds, talking to the other members, the P5, the US, Russia, France, UK, China, and all the non-permanent ones too, like Algeria, Denmark, South Korea, others. The message was clear. Remember Pakistan's track record, especially on terrorism.
Kind of pre-briefing everyone before Pakistan gets the gavel.
Yeah.
Laying down a marker.
Exactly. Trying to sow some seeds of doubt, or at least caution. Although, China's expected to lean towards Pakistan's side, generally.
Okay, so UNSC is one prong. What's the second big push?
That's the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. India is actively trying to get Pakistan put back onto the FATF's gray list.
Right, the FATF. Remind us quickly, what is that, and why is the gray list such a big deal?
Think of FATF as the global money laundering and terror financing police. They set the standards. Being gray-listed isn't a full sanction, but it's a serious warning sign. It says a country isn't doing enough. And the practical effect, it really hurts economically.
How so?
It makes getting international loans, say from the IMF or World Bank, much harder. And it definitely scares off foreign investors. It signals risk.
And Pakistan was on that list for a while, but they got off in 2022, didn't they?
They did. India's argument now, though, is that the underlying issues, particularly around terror financing, haven't really gone away. So pushing for relisting is a kind of calculated diplomatic jab with real economic teeth.
Okay, UNSC pressure, potential FATF gray listing. What's the third pillar of this diplomatic effort?
It really boils down to controlling the narrative around Kashmir. Pakistan constantly frames it as this core, unresolved territorial dispute. India's counter. To shift the focus entirely.
Shifted to what?
To terrorism. India's saying, look, the fundamental issue here isn't just about the land. It's about Pakistan's long history of sponsoring cross-border terrorism.
So stop talking about the fight. Start talking about who keeps starting the fight.
That's pretty much it. They're pointing to specific high-profile attacks as evidence. Mumbai in 2008, Pathankot in 2016, linking them to groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba. It's trying to redirect the global spotlight, asking, who brought the weapon to this argument?
That's a clear framing. But sending envoys is one thing. How are these delegations actually received in these 33 countries? Did they make headway?
Well, the report suggests the reception was mostly polite, Countries listened, they engaged, like you'd treat, polite house guests, but did it translate into immediate full-blown agreement or a dramatic shift in policy?
Right.
Probably not across the board.
So maybe nodding along, but keeping their options open.
Seems like it. Global politics is complicated, right? Every nation has its own interests, its own relationships to balance. They heard India's side, but they're likely processing it carefully.
Okay, so that's the international front. But this narrative battle has huge implications back home in India, too, doesn't it? Especially given how nationalism has been used politically, thinking back to, say, the 2019 Balakot airstrikes.
Yes, exactly. Balakot was framed very effectively as this decisive, clean victory, a real blockbuster narrative, politically speaking. It boosted support, felt quite straightforward.
But Operation Sindoor sounds like it's created a much murkier picture domestically.
It really has. Unlike Balakot's controlled narrative, Pakistan loudly claiming victory after Sindoor, even promoting their general, well, it sparked questions within India. People are asking, were there intelligence gaps? Did the operation go exactly as planned? These doubts weren't really there after Balakot, not in the same way.
And how's the government dealing with those questions, that less clear-cut narrative?
The observation is that the response is less about, say, detailed explanations or open discussion, and more about trying to, crank up the volume on the rhetoric, like trying to fix a leaky roof by just turning up the music. Maybe you don't hear the drip for a while, but the problem's still there.
That sounds like a tricky balancing act.
Right.
If you rely heavily on hyper-nationalism, then anything less than a perceived total win can feel like a vulnerability at home, right?
Absolutely. And there's this growing tension, it seems, between that constant high pitch of nationalism and the day-to-day concerns of ordinary Indians. People are worried about jobs, inflation, education for their kids. The basics.
It's tough to keep waving the flag quite so hard when you're worried about putting food on the table.
Precisely. And the suggestion being made is that maybe, just maybe, a little humility might go further right now than nonstop electioneering 24/7 or constant chest thumping. Acknowledging complexities might actually build more trust when things feel messy.
Let's zoom out again. This India-Pakistan dynamic isn't happening in a vacuum. What's the wider world looking like in 2025? The context for all this?
Well, the description used is pretty blunt. Messy place. You've got the U.S. figuring out its role post-Trump, Russia playing its intricate games, China making assertive moves. Everyone has their own complex agenda.
A lot of moving parts, a lot of distraction.
Definitely. And in that landscape, Pakistan continues to be, a difficult neighbor. The analogy used is quite vivid, like the neighbor who blasts music at 2 a.m. and then denies it. That core accusation of sponsoring terrorism just persists, with those historical examples always bubbling under the surface: Mumbai, Pathankot, Lashkar-e-Taiba.
So even with the ceasefire, that fundamental issue hasn't gone away.
Not at all. And Pakistan promoting General Munir to Field Marshal, it's a bold move for their domestic audience, perhaps, but it doesn't really fix their deep-seated problems. The economy is described as shaky, politics chaotic, and the military's influence remains enormous.
So projecting strength outwards doesn't solve the internal weaknesses.
Pretty much. Which brings us back to India's FATF push. It's seen as a smart, strategic move to apply pressure. But it's also acknowledged that it's probably not a knockout punch. Pakistan has powerful friends, especially China, who can offer some protection.
Okay, given all this complexity, the global scene, the domestic pressures, the narrative war, what's the suggested path forward for India?
The core idea is playing the long game, and that needs a two-pronged approach: guile abroad and empathy at home.
Guile abroad. Tell me more about that. What does that look like?
It means more than just stating your case. It means actively building alliances, persuading the skeptics, especially at the UNSC. It means keeping up that relentless pressure via things like the FATF, and crucially, always framing the Kashmir issue through the lens of terrorism, not letting Pakistan redefine it as just a land dispute. It's about smart, persistent, maybe even slightly cunning diplomacy.
Okay, and the other side of the coin, empathy at home. How does that work?
This is the reality check part. It means maybe easing off the constant chest thumping and actually listening to and addressing what people are really worried about: the economy, jobs, social divisions, environmental challenges.
So acknowledging the leaky roof and actually trying to fix it.
Exactly. It might even mean, being open about potential intelligence reviews or military performance assessments instead of just shutting down questions. It's about showing the government gets the real-world problems people face. There was even a point made about government sometimes needing to be able to laugh at themselves a bit, not taking everything so seriously all the time.
And this domestic piece feels really tied to India's broader goals, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
chairing the G20 in 2025. You want to project strength globally, but that requires a sense of stability and confidence at home.
Absolutely. You can't really be a leading voice on the world stage if things feel unsettled or disconnected back home. Addressing those domestic concerns isn't just good politics, it actually strengthens India's international position.
And that analogy of diplomacy being like a high-stakes stand-up routine really sticks.
Yeah, it's powerful, isn't it? It suggests it's not just what you say, but how you say it. Reading the room, understanding your audience, having the right delivery. It takes that blend of guile, empathy, and maybe a well-timed joke or two to really land your message in this complex world.
So to wrap this deep dive up, that May 10th ceasefire wasn't the end of the story between India and Pakistan. Not by a long shot.
No, definitely not. It really just marked a shift. The main battlefield moved, you could say, into this realm of narrative, thought out globally and right here at home.
And we see India responding with this major diplomatic push internationally, while also grappling with managing the story and public sentiment domestically.
And what this really highlights, I think, is that this whole situation goes beyond just borders and military actions. It's fundamentally about how India constructs and tells its story to the world, yes, but maybe even more importantly, to its own people.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it, about the sheer power of narrative in international relations. How countries carefully build their versions of events, and how those stories shape everything, national identity, global perceptions, even ultimately what happens next on the ground. It's a reminder to always look critically at the stories we're told.
Absolutely. That battle for the narrative, it might just be the most important battlefield there is today.